All right, Joanna Nylund, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brett.
So you are the author of a book called Sisu, The Finnish Art of Courage. We've written about Sisu on the site before, and you say this, it's like this untranslatable Finnish word. So I'm going to ask you how to translate Sisu into English. What is Sisu?
Well, I would say perhaps if you would ask me for like one single definition, I would say stubborn determination. I think that probably covers most bases, but it's also, I think for me personally, the closest one would be resilience. There's a lot of tenacity in there, but also a kind of courage. So that's why I argue that not only is Sisu kind of untranslatable from Finnish, we kind of need one word to cover all those different aspects, in my opinion.
How long has this word been around? Is it a relatively new word, or has it been around in Finland for a long time?
It's been around for like a really long time. I think the earliest written record was from 500 years ago, but that's just the written record. So I would guess, it feels like it's been part of us forever and certainly part of our vernacular and our identity. So I think probably from like time immemorial, basically, it's been impossible to trace.
All right, so Sisu, it's like a grit, a determination, a courage, all those things in one. And I think really to understand Sisu, you can't really say it in words. And even Finns, like they say, if you ask a Finn, like, what is Sisu? They're like, I can show you what Sisu is, but I can't describe it. So let's try to like describe Sisu with some action. I think the story that we've written about on the site that I think really captures this idea of Sisu it's from the history of Finland. It was during World War II, and this is the Winter War against the Russians. For those who aren't familiar with the Winter War, can you walk us through it and how you think that exemplifies Sisu?
Okay, so basically what happened was that in the winter of 1939, the Soviet Union attacked Finland. And obviously, Finland was and still is a very small country. Now there's about 5.5 million of us. And I think back then it was probably less than 4. And versus the Soviet Union, which was obviously, a superpower. And the Russians had 3 times as many troops, and I think 30 times as many aircraft and 100 times more tanks. And basically Finland had nothing. Even the reserves that had to be called in, they weren't like uniforms for everyone. So people had to bring their own clothes, and they had to make these like white camouflage clothing out of like bed linen, basically. And it was all really like a do-it-yourself kind of war. But we decided to fight it anyway because it was basically for our sovereignty. That was what was at stake. And I think in the global press, I think it was maybe the New York Times or someone who called it a David versus Goliath kind of situation, because the odds were just completely hopelessly stacked against Finland from day one. But I wasn't obviously part of it, but this is something we feel very passionately about in Finland. What we did was basically to use our small size to our advantage, to try to have as much ingenuity as possible when it came to how to defend ourselves, which basically meant, guerrilla tactics and trying to make all those very scant resources go as far as they possibly could. And Finns, we did have an advantage, being in our own country and knowing how to ski and use snowshoes and knowing the landscape and things like that obviously worked to our advantage. But nobody, I think, least of all us, expected it to go as well as it did, because we lasted from November 39 to March 1940. We did eventually have to cede some territory to the Soviet Union, but we didn't lose our independence, our sovereignty, and we didn't lose nearly as many men as the Soviets did. And I think the figures are somewhere around 25,000 Finns versus 200,000 Russians. And this kind of changed not only, I think, our sort of the course of our future, but also the course of the war, according to some, because, for those of you listening who know their World War II history, they know that Hitler, he decided to attack the Soviet Union with the Operation Barbarossa. And he did that basically because he felt that they must be pretty weak if Finland can beat them, you know. So, and that was obviously the beginning of the end for him. But for us, this has been, you know, like a pivotal time and a pivotal moment, because I think even the decision to even decide, you know, to fight under those circumstances, to actually try, it was an act of Sisu, most definitely.
I mean, so like, there's a lot of things you can take from that, like that can tell you about what it means to have Sisu. So, and what are some like takeaways that you got from that experience that kind of exemplifies Sisu?
Well, obviously, you know, that stubborn determination never to give up, even in the face of absolutely impossible odds. I mean, that's what I think, that's the one definition that I think most Finns would agree on. Because then if you ask, I mean, people have all kinds of definitions of Sisu, and for some, it's a very personal thing, but I think that's the one. Like you just go through, you go through, you know, hell and high water to just stick to what you've decided and to win the day, basically. So that's obviously one. And then I think another one is really to use your perceived weakness to your advantage, and to think outside the box, you know, to really get creative on when you come up against different obstacles, and to sort of let them challenge you instead of take away your courage. Those are just a few from off the top of my head.
And so, I mean, this moment is pivotal in Finland. But again, what we've been talking about, Sisu, this is a concept or an idea that's ingrained in your culture, and like kids pick it up. Like, why do you think? What is it about Finland that, you know? What do you think led to developing this idea of Sisu?
Well, that's a really good question, because it's like I said, you know, we've had it for such a long time. But I think definitely the climate probably has a lot to do with it, because it's kind of been tough. You know, we have nice summers and all that, but on the whole, it's kind of, I think it must have been a very difficult country to settle, you know, back in the day, and to scratch a living out of the earth and all those things. So probably you would have needed a certain kind of hardiness, and definitely tenacity, and a tendency to want to stick things out, just to stay, basically. And I'm sure that goes for a lot of the Nordics and other cold regions of the world. But I think that, and then perhaps in more recent history, we've been like one guy that I interviewed for the book, he said that, well, you've been either colonized or invaded. You know, like that's probably gonna you know, have an effect on your attitude towards life and towards how you see yourself. And I agree. I think history plays a big role, but also the climate, and probably something else, you know, like an X factor, like, you know, what is it that defines a certain people? What is it that gives them a character that lets you tell them apart from others? I mean, I don't know. It's maybe something a bit mysterious as well.
But what's interesting, so Sisu's is like sort of grit, determination. You would think, you know, very like stone-faced, stoic, and just, you know.
Yeah.
But Finns are some of the happiest people in the world, according to some reports.
Yeah.
Do you think Sisu?
You know,
do you think Sisu has something to do with that?
Yeah, I do. I do think it has a lot to do with that. But you know, that always makes me laugh, because when I think we've been the happiest country in the world for like the third year running now, and people here just scoff. You know, when they see that, they're like, really? We're not happy. Everybody knows we're not happy. Because first of all, I think people mistake, you know, what is meant by happiness, you know, in the happiness index, which I think is more a sense of satisfaction with life, basically, and a sense of security and a sense of self-determination and all those things. I think that's what is really measured in that happiness index, and that's where we rank really high. And I think people would agree if it was phrased more like that. But it's just that the word happy kind of rings very, you know, has a very strange ring to a lot of Finns, because we're not a carnival kind of people. You know, we're quite serious and unsmiling on the whole. I mean, there are individual differences and all that, but yeah. So that's a funny thing, because I get interviewed about that sometimes, and it's always like the reaction in Finland is always like, they should come here and see what it's like if they think we're the happiest people. So there is that. But I think definitely, you know, I mean, what is it that makes people happy? Like in a deeply felt sense, I think, you know, having a society that you're proud of, and a society where you feel like there is an opportunity for me to fulfill my dreams, or at least try, and to be safe, and for my kids to be safe, for them to have good schooling, for just a general sense that things are running well, and we can trust our government, and those things. So I think Sisu has definitely built, the society that we now have. That is my firm belief, anyway.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. So I think oftentimes when Americans think of like Sisu and grit, they're going to think of, because we're individualistic, and we're going to think, well, it's an individual trait. But you describe Sisu, there's like a collective sense. There's a group Sisu as well. I mean, you can see that with the Winter War. Like that wasn't just, there was individuals who exemplified Sisu, but they also had to exemplify Sisu as a group.
They did, yeah. And I think in general too, my grandmother, who was a young mother when the war broke out, she always said that people came together like at no time before. She'd never seen anything like it before or since. Just that sense of community, that for this time we need to pull together. We need to set our differences aside, and we need to come together and just be as one. And I mean, we're in difficult times right now. Right? I mean, the world. And I think this is my own personal theory that basically nations that aren't as divided are probably doing a bit better, in fighting COVID, because it does require that kind of community thinking and one for all for one and one for all. And I feel that that's what community Sisu is about, is that you go through something difficult, but you go through it together and you try to be there for one another.
So in the book, you have this section that I had a lot of fun with, where you describe how the way Sisu is used in language, right? How parents talk to their kids about Sisu, and there's like Sisu sayings that are kind of like pump up sayings. What can you walk us some of these Finnish sayings about Sisu?
Yeah, well, there's one. There's a few that I mentioned in the book. There's one called Sisulla ja sydämellä, which is with Sisu and heart, and that's something that you see kind of used a lot, because it basically is, that's what we want to embody. That's how we want to live. We want to have Sisu and we want to have heart. And then I think I mentioned this läpi harmaan kiven, which is literally means going through the gray stone. And the gray stone referred to is granite, gray granite, which we have a lot of in Finland, and it's really, really hard. And that kind of it doesn't mention the word Sisu, but it's a very Sisu saying, in the sense that's how we feel, that we're just gonna like go through this rock, basically, if that's what it takes, Yeah, and I think there was something else, but I can't remember. Unless you have it there in front of you.
Yeah, and one thing I liked is that parents tell their kids like the best compliment a kid can get is when a parent says, "You have Sisu." Like, makes a kid's day.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes you sort of grow, 10 inches at least.
Yeah.
As a kid.
Well, let's talk about some ways people can cultivate Sisu in their own lives, even if they don't live in Finland.
Yeah.
And so the most obvious way I think people can like develop Sisu is like, well, just do uncomfortable things. So how do Finns embrace discomfort to cultivate Sisu, and what can like other people from other countries learn from that?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that, definitely Sisu is a universal trait. It's not something that we only possess. It's just that we have happened to kind of name it, and make use of it. I think probably you mentioned discomfort, and I think that's a really key element in cultivating some Sisu for yourself. And I think one thing that we do it is obviously, like I already mentioned, the climate. That when you live in a place where the climate is kind of tough for big parts of the year, you kind of have to decide how you're going to let that affect you. And I'm sure this is true for, like I said, all regions in the world where the climate is a bit of a challenge, is that you learn to work around it, and you learn to not let it dictate what you can and can't do. So that's something I think, like we see now, for instance. I mean, we still have winter here. And, it doesn't matter how cold it is. You'll see people cycling, you'll see people running, you'll see them obviously skiing and skating and doing all these things. But it's kind of like an everyday thing where you sort of quietly defy, any circumstances that are kind of set against you. And also to experience, I think, the joy that lies on the other side of that. That if you, for instance, as a child, I think I mentioned in the book that if you do something that is a bit uncomfortable, and maybe you get cold, or maybe you get wet, or it's a bit tough, you just feel so much more empowered afterwards. And that's something I notice equally much, I think, as an adult, that it does me good, to actually push myself a little, even if it's just like a daily discomfort, or like, well, I'm sure you're going to mention the summer cottage thing, perhaps later on, but that's also an aspect of that we actually want to spend some of our holidays, in discomfort. That's a very Finnish thing. But I think basically, you don't be too soft on yourself. Maybe that's the core message. Don't always go where the sort of the threshold is the lowest. Don't always be so extra kind to yourself. Like try to push yourself a little bit and see what happens.
No, and another another takeaway I got from that is that Finns really embrace contrast or extremes. So as you said, their winters are very cold. It's very dark. And then in the summer, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, but like the days are longer, and like they embrace that. But the other thing you kind of embrace for contrast is you have, well, in America we say sauna, but I've learned that it's sauna.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
So you have the sauna culture as well. It's you go from extreme cold to extreme heat.
Yes. Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Do you have a sauna in your house? In your place?
Yeah, I mean, I live in an apartment building, but sure. Yeah, we do. You can sign up, and you sort of book a time on Saturday or Friday or Sunday or whenever, and you go with your spouse or your family and for an hour or so. Yeah, it's wonderful.
No, I've got a sauna. It's one of the biggest.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it was one of the best purchases I ever made. It's fantastic. I love it. And it's been great here in Oklahoma this winter. We've had a really tough winter. Got a lot of ice and snow. It's like -6 degrees, and it was great to get in the sauna. And then being there, it's like 190 degrees, and then come out in the air where it's -6. You're like, this is amazing. Feels fantastic.
Well, you're onto something there.
I've developed some sisu. Okay, so you mentioned the cabin culture. I didn't know this about Finland. So having a summer cabin is a fairly common thing, but it's not like a cabin where there's electricity and running water. It's just like, it's basically a building with 4 walls and a roof.
Yeah, basically, I mean, for the diehards, I think I did add in the book as well that, of course, things are changing because we are more comfort loving. And I think my generation is, and probably the next one even more. But for the diehards, it has to be like a proper, like it's basically back to nature. That's and like you say, it's a good point, that we always seem to be like, we've had to live with these contrasts, but we also seem to search them out, I would say, because obviously we have, very comfortable homes in the city or wherever we live, always double glazing and well insulated houses, and we're very snug and warm in wintertime and all that. But then we want this simplicity. We want this feeling of coming back to something more primal, I would say, something that is a lot more connected to nature. And I think to some degree we are, as a people, we are still quite connected to nature, or even feeling like a longing for it, or that we belong in nature. And we don't want to bring all of the comforts and, perks of modern life into that. We actually want to, lead a simple life for a few weeks every summer and come back refreshed. So that's a bit weird. I know, but.
No, that's a good point. So this isn't a cabin you go to just for the weekend. Like they'll take 2 or 3 weeks at the beginning of the summer to do that, right?
Oh yeah, and some people they just want to isolate like completely. They just stay there. They don't want to see anybody. That's their idea of a good summer holiday, is that you let your beard grow and you walk around in your sweatpants from 10 years ago, and you do some odd jobs around the summer cabin, because there's obviously lots of things to do always, to fix and so on, but not seeing anyone and not sort of just kind of really, leading a hermit existence for a few weeks. That's a lot of people. That's their highest dream. That's what they want to do.
Well, so there's
somewhere in between, I'm not really that hardcore, but.
Well, there's some takeaways there from the summer cabin thing about other ways you can develop sisu. One is that solitude or silence. You talk about that in the book, the idea of silence. Like how does silence develop sisu, you think?
Oh, I think I get really excited about this. I even wrote a book about silence specifically last year, and because it intrigues me so much. But I think when it comes to silence, to sisu, I think basically what creates Sisu is kind of this, if you go really deep and philosophical, it's kind of this inner focus, this inner peace. And I think in order to develop it at all, you kind of have to come face to face with yourself. You have to not be afraid to be, by yourself in silence, at least for like short periods of time. And, there used to be a time not that long ago when that was self-evident and people would kind of do that without even thinking. But now, obviously, life looks very different, and we have to really commit to having even 5 minutes of silence in a day. Sometimes it feels like. But I think it's really essential to sort of just center yourself, to focus. And people talk about mindfulness and all that stuff, and maybe you could call it mindfulness, but for me, it's just kind of, it's a form of connection, and I don't feel like I even know what's going on with me, unless I take that time every day, because there's so much input. There's, everything from social media to news coverage all the time. And there's pods and radio, and there's music playing, and there's all these things kind of coming at us, all the time. And I really feel the need personally to just sit in silence for a bit and figure out what's going on with me and kind of connect with myself. And that's where I think Sisu starts, that I can't really connect with this inner strength that I have, unless I do that. And nature obviously is a really good vehicle for bringing out silence, because that, you kind of go out there and you immediately, you're kind of plunged into this sense of, peace and harmony. And it kind of, it's just kind of takes care of itself, I think. Sorry for the long answer.
No, I know. I love it. It sounds like you're passionate about this.
I am. Yeah.
So some ways to cultivate silence, just kind of disconnect from the internet, from the hive mind, make moments where you're not checking your phone all the time. And then also, be alone. Like a sauna is a great place to be alone if you want to.
Oh, yeah.
But then, you said nature. Yeah.
But the sauna too, and it's quite meditative, don't you find? If you're in there by yourself and in the heat and everything, and you find your thoughts kind of slowing down, and you're thinking about nothing in particular, and it's just the most wonderful feeling.
No, it's I love it. So you mentioned nature. So Finns, I imagine they love to hike, love to snowshoe. They love to be outdoors no matter what the weather is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No such thing as bad weather. Just bad
absolutely.
clothes.
Yeah, basically. And the Swedes have a saying like that too. So, I think it goes for all the Nordics, because, we've kind of been faced with a choice that either we kind of just sit on our couch for half of the year, or we decide that we're going to go out there no matter what, I have my limits. For now, for instance, right now, we've had like really, really icy weather for about 2 days, and I've tried not to go out because I really hate it when it's that slippery. But that's my only exception. Otherwise, I will go out no matter what the weather.
Okay, so some Nordic countries have an idea. So we've had Mike Viking on the podcast talk about hygge. I think it's from Denmark. Do the Finns have a similar concept to that? There's an opposite of Sisu that if you experience Sisu, you can enjoy this feeling of, I don't know, comfort or coziness. I don't know, is there something like that?
Well, I don't think they're related concepts necessarily. I know Mike, actually, we did this speaking engagement together, like a panel a few years ago. And it was really interesting to contrast these different ideas that we have in the Nordics. But I think, we have hygge as well. Of course, who doesn't like to cuddle up, with under a blanket and light some candles and drink a glass of wine. Of course we enjoy that. And I think that's something you need to, you can't neglect that either, especially in winter time. You have to, because you will still be spending a lot of time indoors, and you have to make yourself cozy. So I wouldn't say necessarily that Sisu is something that makes you cozy, but we just kind of, we easily borrow from our neighbors, and I think they borrow from us as well.
So, okay, some things to cultivate Sisu: embrace discomfort, get outside, embrace silence, disconnect, so you can tap into that inner strength, inner reservoir of strength. Then you also, in the book, you talk about how there's a Sisu way. You make the case that there's a Sisu way of communicating. So, what is that? How do Finns communicate, and how is Sisu influence that?
Well, I think we're known as being fairly blunt and unsmiling. I don't necessarily count myself in among that, but as a people, but behind that bluntness, is a real love of honesty and being genuine and being authentic and speaking the truth. And I have a chapter in the book about business negotiations because this is where I've observed it close hand, how Finns negotiate and what is different in our culture. And I think there is just a value of being a straight talker and of being very upfront about issues and problems, for instance, in a business, because obviously naming the problem is like really necessary in order to be able to start work on it. So I think that's the Sisu thing, it's an integrity thing. And also we really mean what we say, in Finland. And there's this like, I don't mean to say that other peoples don't, but there is a culture, where you have these phrases that don't necessarily mean very much. A classic one, I think, is, the American who comes and you run into him in the street and he's like, "Oh, this is so nice to see you. Let's meet up sometime." And the Finn will immediately bring out his calendar and go, "Okay, when?"
Calling us on our bluff.
Yeah, exactly. And the American will be embarrassed, and the Finn will be like, "But you said you wanted to meet up. I thought you were sincere." So it's those kind of funny situations that occur. So we don't really understand that kind of we don't really do small talk, and we don't necessarily have all these nice phrases and that tend to fill out things and perhaps make people more comfortable. I don't know. But the upside, I would argue, is that when we speak, that we speak the truth. And if a Finn is your friend, then he's going to be your friend for life and he's going to stick by you. And, so it's all that sort of putting a lot of value on being authentic and genuine and being honest, and that your handshake and that your word really should mean something. That's very Sisu, and that's very much, I think, part of how we communicate, both in business and sort of at a state level, with heads of state and so on. So that's something that really runs through also our personal communication.
Well, I imagine too, Sisu helps Finns have those hard conversations that other people would want to avoid. So you're like, nope, what's this? I got to have Sisu here, dig deep, have some grit, and let's have this uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah. I don't think it's a coincidence that we've had some peace brokers, like some successful ones have come from Finland, because if you're sitting there with two warring parties, at the same table, I think you have to just call a spade and kind of be very blunt and upfront about what the issues are. And that's where the Finnishness kind of helps.
So we had a lot of people who are listening to this podcast who are parents. And I know a lot of parents, particularly in America, they're concerned about, they want their kids to be resilient. They want them to not, be burdened by anxiety or things like that. So what do you think American parents or, Canadian, British, I don't know, whoever, South Africa, I don't know, whoever's listening to this, Japan, what can we learn from the Finns on how to foster Sisu in our children?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think one phrase that I used in the book was cheerful empowerment, which I feel is something that my parents did for me. Is that when I would be whining and complaining and not wanting to do things, they would just have this fairly cheerful approach and be like, "Oh, it's not that bad, and you'll like it when you're out there, and like if it's too cold, just keep moving," and all those things that I feel like I'm much obliged to them for having done that because they knew that I could do it. It's more of a kind of instilling in the child a sense of belief in themselves. And of course, that's, sometimes easier said than done. But I think part of it is allowing kids a little bit of freedom. And I know that this is really a tricky one because, there are so many dangers lurking out there. And obviously, if you live in a big city anywhere in the world, you can't just let your kids go out and play anywhere or just say, "Oh, come back by 5, or whatever." So I know it's a big challenge, but I think at least in principle, to try to allow them some freedom, to try to allow them to get some scrapes and bruises and to maybe fall off their bike or fall down from a tree if not too high, but to kind of just maybe let them discover their own inner strength in a way, because it's not something that they can really figure out if they don't ever do anything, or if they're never allowed to do anything, and or to try their own boundaries and see what they're actually capable of. So it's really difficult. It's a very sort of shaky line to walk. I know that, but I think that's probably what lies at the heart of Finnish, like how we raise our children, is that principle, a sort of, supervised freedom, but freedom.
Yeah. So I mean, like, do like parents just like say, get out of the house and kids can go explore wherever they want and just like be back by dinner time? Is that kind of how it is?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I grew up in the countryside, and it was definitely like that. Like my mom would say, I have two older brothers, and she was a bit more cautious with me, she said. But with them, it was just like, she wouldn't know where they were. They were like gone the whole day. And she was, they're with their friends somewhere. And this was, way before cell phones or anything like that. And she would just be like, well, if, they're supposed to turn up by 5, if they don't turn up by 6, then maybe I'll start to ring around, their friends' parents. So that sense of like, not neglect by any means, but just a sense of ease, perhaps, that they're going to be fine. And I actually think that kids are a lot more resilient than we give them credit for a lot of the time. That they're not, they won't break or they won't melt if it rains on them a little bit. That kind of thinking, that's very Finnish, I think, and very Sisu.
Another thing you talked about, your mom would say to you, like when you were kind of timid about something, it was like something like go boldly or do it boldly.
Yeah.
I really like that. Yeah. I thought that was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, she would say that. Yeah, rohkeasti vaan, which means to just boldly now, basically.
Boldly now, yeah.
Boldly now, yeah, just go for it, And it was me on my ice skates when I was 4. But yeah, it's a really good principle. I think I still keep that, in mind. I still have that phrase in the back of my head, that just go for it. And I would think that's a very American notion as well, to not let your fears decide, what you're going to do.
Well, Joanna, this has been a great conversation. Where can people go to learn more about the book and the rest of your work?
Well, basically, I'm not very active on social media, I'm afraid, but I do have social media accounts. So you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. The book you can basically buy wherever books are sold online, and in the States, it's distributed by Running Press. But yeah, I think it's not a hard book to find.
Well, fantastic. Well, yeah, it's not having social media presence. That's very, very Sisu.
Well, I do, but I'm not very active, and I don't know. I'm not an influencer, in that sort of social media sense. But I do hope to influence people, via my books and my writing and so on. But yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Joanna, thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Brett, so much. It's been my pleasure. Absolutely. Thanks.
My guest today was Joanna Nylund. She's the author of the book Sisu, The Finnish Art of Courage. It's available on Amazon.com and bookstores everywhere. Make sure to check out our show notes at aom.is/Sisu, where you can find links to resources where you can delve deeper into this topic.